Kamala crash. We're going to have a crash like 1929 if she gets in. It will not be pretty.
We also do have nonpartisan groups like the Penn-Wharton group that put out their budget model and said that Donald Trump would take the deficit $5.8 trillion she'd only add $1.2 trillion. You had Goldman Sachs that came out today, and they said that the GDP will significantly decrease under Donald Trump and it'll continue to increase under Kamala Harris. Look at what Moody's has said, also nonpartisan, talking about how if you're going to round up a bunch of immigrants and you're going to have tariffs, which he keeps saying isn't a tax on consumers, and that's what the national tax is that people are talking about, if you're going to implement tariffs, guess what's going to happen? The economy is going to suffer for it. That's not what Kamala Harris is proposing.
Oh, that's gonna hurt.
Now, where have I heard him say this before?
We're going to have a crash.
So the stock market will boom if I'm elected. If he's elected, the stock market will crash.
Okay. Oh, that's right. When he predicted it would happen during the 2020 presidential debate, it, of course, didn't.
Here we go. Look at the markets. Yes, the Dow is, well, firmly above 40,000. 40,044 to be precise. That is a gain of 136 points, just over 1/3 of 1%.
The only crash came as a result of him woefully mismanaging the pandemic, and he said it would happen again during the Biden administration, which, again, he was wrong about. In fact, the stock market has soared alongside the record-breaking Dow.
When there's a crash, I hope it's going to be during this next 12 months. Because I don't want to be Herbert Hoover. The one president, I just don't want to be Herbert Hoover.
He's acknowledging that my economy is doing pretty darn well because he doesn't want that to continue. And by the way, the idea that he wants to see a crash in the next 12 months, doesn't want to be Herbert Hoover, he has to understand, he's already Herbert Hoover.
And just today, to add to Donald Trump's misery, after putting out another video touting an impending economic crash under Kamala Harris if she's to win the presidency, Fox News host Jessica Tarlov was on hand to deliver today's crushing news for Donald Trump.
Go ahead. Yeah, totally. We have excellent counters of all political persuasions, but we also do have nonpartisan groups like the Penn-Wharton group that put out their budget model and said that Donald Trump would take the deficit $5.8 trillion she'd only add $1.2 trillion. You had Goldman Sachs that came out today, and they said that the GDP will significantly decrease under Donald Trump and it'll continue to increase under Kamala Harris. Look at what Moody's has said, also nonpartisan, talking about how if you're going to round up a bunch of immigrants and you're going to have tariffs, which he keeps saying isn't a tax on consumers, and that's what the national tax is that people are talking about, if you're going to implement tariffs, guess what's going to happen? The economy is going to suffer for it. That's not what Kamala Harris is proposing in the American public.
I'm going to steal 30 seconds for Brian.
According to a Tuesday note from Goldman Sachs, economists at the firm have estimated that if, quote, Trump wins in a sweep or divided government, the hit to growth from tariffs and tighter immigration policy would outweigh the positive fiscal impulse. They project that GDP growth would peak at 0.5 percentage points in 2025, positive effects of which would abate in 2026. And by contrast, Goldman predicted that if Vice President Kamala Harris wins the White House and Democrats sweep, quote, new spending and expanded middle-income tax credits would slightly more than offset lower investment due to the higher corporate tax rates, resulting in a boost to GDP growth on average over 2025-2026. Which I know is a lot of business lingo, but it translates to ketchup everywhere at Mar-a-Lago. In a statement to Bloomberg, the Trump campaign said in response, quote, these Wall Street elites would be wise to review the record and acknowledge the shortcomings of their past work if they'd like their new forecasts to be seen as credible. Meaning, as usual, the Trump team have no response, so they opt to attack those reporting the message rather than offer a defense to the message itself.
We look back into the data, and we're looking at this now for the last 4 months. We've been pointing out that there are no Fortune 500 CEOs who are supporting former President Trump, and that is a historic break going back to William Howard Taft and through Calvin Coolidge and Ronald Reagan and the Bushes and everything. Is that it's been anywhere from 40 to 60% public and financial support. It's zero now, and it was zero in 2016. And the Trump economic package frightens them. It's extremely inflationary. The tariffs, 10% across the board on all imports, that's just crazy. It leads to a 3% increase for sure in inflation and plunging the GDP. Right. And that's before retaliatory gestures, the increase in the deficit. He wants to cut $5 trillion of taxes with no commensurate cut in expenditures. So these are problems. He doesn't believe in the independence
what
of the Fed.
What do you say to the CEOs? There's a lot of CEOs who are watching us now, probably watching you speaking, saying, but you know what? I don't like the Biden administration when it comes to the regulatory regime right now. I worry about the tax policy and what's going to happen if the Trump taxes roll off in 2025 and what that debate looks like. I mean, there are folks, as you said, 70% of the CEO community, Republicans. Do they turn out to be reluctant Biden voters? Do they not vote at all? I mean, where do you think they land?
They'll be reluctant Biden voters. They don't want the fabric of society pulled apart.
And you know why this will send Trump headfirst into a low-energy rant on the matter on Hannity later? Because it's about the economy, right? The one thing that somehow he's been able to convince large swaths of the US population that he's the better candidate on. It infuriates me because it's simply not true.
See, she's defective. She's a defective person. And we don't need another defective person as president of the United States. We just had that.
And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do, either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting. Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection?
He may claim time and time again that his economy was, quote, the greatest the country has ever seen. But even outside the COVID crutch his followers cling to as an excuse to his woeful performance while in office, the data doesn't lie. His economy is actually one of the worst.
But look what's been happening in the last year. Probably people don't realize this. First of all, inflation has come way down. And it is very close, as Jerome Powell suggested in his testimony yesterday. It's getting very close to where the Fed could cut interest rates as soon as September. And secondly, for more than a year, wage growth has been higher than inflation. In other words, the wage growth, the black line, higher than the green line. And so we are making up ground, and it is moving in the right direction.
One of the arguments we've heard, Steve, and we heard it again last night from Donald Trump, is that effectively, if it weren't for COVID, I would have had the greatest economy in the history of America. And in fact, he said yet last night, until COVID hit, I had the strongest and best economy ever. The data you just put up there accounts for that. You said, let's be fair and let's consider COVID. Is there any accuracy to what Donald Trump says there?
No, I think it is right here. It is right here. He not only didn't have the greatest economy ever, he didn't even have the greatest economy of the last two presidents. 2.6% for Donald Trump. 3.6 for Joe Biden, with, I will tell you, is a completely honest and fair removal of COVID from the statistics.
What he did is he tripled the national debt and gave tax breaks to his friends in the 1% club. That's not a thriving economy. That's socialism for the rich, which he knows all too well.
You've never done so well. And anything left over, like you see the fumes, it's the fumes of the Trump administration. That's the only thing that's keeping this Biden thing a little bit alive. Because their numbers are no good except for the stock market. They have terrible inflation numbers still. But the stock market, that's the fumes of what we did, and the fact that I'm leading every poll. If I weren't leading every poll, the stock market would crash.
Look, it's been hard globally the last 6-7 years. But again, America stands tall. We're the tentpole of the world economy. No peers economically. Again, a masterclass of delivering. The economy is booming, inflation is cooling, and of course the economic strategies this president's put together were all things Republicans dreamt of, but never delivered. He's delivered.
Her new plan for a $50,000 tax credit for small businesses coupled with less red tape is great policy for everyday Americans. In fact, it's so good that it's got Fox News hosts contradicting each other on the regular.
This position she's taking on regulation and tax cuts, she didn't create that. She doesn't even know what this stuff means. Do you think if you could ask Kamala Harris to explain what a small business startup tax deduction means, she could explain it? No. Kamala, what exactly are the regulations that you're going to be cutting for small business? She can't answer. Dana, she's the one that put the regulations on with COVID. I mean, if you install like a electric charging station, you have to hire a Pacific Islander under the Kamala Harris, Joe Biden plan. All that.
It's really hard to think that she's going to walk back on all of that right now.
I just want to press the point. When a political candidate comes up with what I think is a good idea, I have to call it a good idea. And a $50,000 tax cut for small, not tax cut, but a tax credit for startups or small businesses, coupled with less red tape. I gotta say, that is a good idea, regardless of our other tax ideas.
While that may be a good idea, it's hard to see how she's going to move forward with it.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.